Welcome, everybody. We're going to be working on the Unit 4 exercise this evening. With any luck, we'll be able to get through a good portion of this. Um, I'm not promising we can finish the whole thing, but we will try. Um, the focus tonight is to learn how to create a database, create a table, um, insert information into a table, declare data types and everything, um, create more than one table, put data in all the tables, change some of the data, and delete some of the data. And if you start thinking about how much that is, that's really quite a bit to do. Um, it's not as hard as it sounds to do. So like some of this stuff is a little bit different than what we're doing. Normally, so far, we've been just extracting information out of the database, not creating components of it and putting data into it. But that is an important part of it. So that's the focus. I do have the homework document open here, which is kind of our, let's say, our script for doing the work. And you can see here the first directives. All right, Joe, I do see your message there. All right, so all right, it says please create and execute on your local MySQL database as we have been doing. Do your screen captures, yada yada yada. But in order to start, I don't know if you guys are noticing in the first step here, we are going to create a database from scratch. So instead of using one that's pre-created, we are going to create our own. And I think this is fun. So back over here inside of MySQL Workbench, we have been most recently working on the classic models database. And of course, the reason I'm checking here is, I've taught this class more than once. So I get into this situation where the stuff that I'm trying to create is already in my database. So I'm actually going to start by deleting stuff. And notice that they want me to create a database called my database. And then when I look over here, sure enough, I already have one called that. And I can see my tables in there. There's a department table. You can see the columns down here, an instructor and a student. Right, so all three of those tables. And that's what we did last time. Now, to get rid of that table, I'm going to come here to a query window, and I'm going to say use my database. And I will say, like normally we do a use statement first when we run queries, otherwise the queries don't work. This really technically really isn't required to drop a database, but I'm going to drop a database to start with. And I don't want you to do this command, obviously, because it won't work anyhow for you because you don't have this database. But don't do it on a database that you've already been working on, because you'll get rid of it, right? And we've talked about this during the lecture. When you do destructive things in a database, there's no undo, right? They didn't build that capability in, and there's reasons for that, by the way, right? So I'm going to run this statement. So we're using my database. Now I'm going to run this statement and drop the database. If you look at my schema table here, like listing, you will notice that my database did go away. So I'm ready now to start coding from scratch. I'm just going to delete the stuff in that query. It's okay. And I'll just start over. All right. So let's take the first command then, which is just very simply create database, my database. Now, I don't know if you guys picked up on this. Here they're using camel casing, capital D. And the last time I just didn't do that. I just used the lowercase d. And I think I did it as an example. You can call the database whatever you want, but this makes sense to just follow the instructions here. So we're going to create it, and then we're going to issue a use statement so we're attached to it. So let's do that. So create database, my database. And I am camel casing it this time. All right. I'm running the query. All right. And now I don't see it here. And this is the thing when you create a new one. If you don't see it right away, hit this little icon up here, which is a refresh, and then you will see it. But notice what it did to it. It got rid of the capital D. What does that tell you about the capitalization inside there? It doesn't care. That's what it does, what it means, right? So it does not matter. Right? Okay. A little uncomfortable for people that know how to code, because in coding we're usually taught it's got to be exact, and here we are in SQL and it's not. Okay, so I mean, another aspect of working with this stuff. They did also want us to do a use, so we're just going to say use my database, and we'll execute that. All right, so now we're ready to put code inside of it. All right, let's look at the next instruction. It says create a new table named student. The table should have the following fields, and you can see these are not the column names, by the way. This is a table of information. These are the column names. These are the data types that you should select, and some of the other features you should add. Now, we didn't talk about the null thing, but when we're creating certain database entries, and I guess I maybe should have lectured on this a little better, is there's certain fields that we enter in a database table that have to be there. I'll give you an example. If I create like a new student in my database and they have a student ID, and like here at Gateway, if you don't have a student ID, you can't register for classes, you can't get a report card, can't do anything. You don't get a bill, none of that stuff. So the student ID is one where it must be entered. It's not an option, right? And what they're showing you here is the first and the last name also must be included. However, maybe the person's homeless. I don't know. Or maybe they, I don't know, don't have an address right now. Or they're moving or whatever. So there's some fields that aren't marked that way. So in other words, these can be blank. These cannot. The other little tidbit, right? The primary key. And the primary key is a way of saying that this is a column where the information must be unique. So you can't have two students with the same student ID. Whatever value is in there is going to be a unique value. All right. Right. And then this last column here is just information. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. So they want us to create a table that has all these features. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to code that. There is a lot of typing in this, right? And my intent here is to try to get through this typing as quickly as possible and do most of these examples. And it does take some time, and because I'm trying to explain stuff at the same time. Also, if you can't keep up with the typing or whatever, it might be better to watch and then do it in the aftermath, watching the video, or take the knowledge that you've learned and just try it on your own and then watch the video if you need the support. Right. All right. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to switch over to MySQL Workbench here, and I'm going to start building the table. So basically what we're doing is we're going to create a table that we're going to place inside of our database that's going to be called student. So here's the command: create table student. And then what we do is parentheses and a semicolon. And okay, so this is goofy on my part, but being used to a lot of like more advanced IDEs where you hit like a parentheses and it auto completes the closer and then you just type in between. That's kind of what I do. And I do that as a matter of habit when I'm typing, so I don't forget, because what will happen is you'll open a parentheses and you type all this stuff and then you forget to close it and then you get an error and you're like, what happened? Right. So whenever you create something that has to close, just close it right away. And you know what? Terminate the statement right away too. Then you won't forget. And then what I do is I put my cursor in between and then I press enter a few times. And I have a little space in between. Right. So I'm going to start typing in both the column names. Now, what's helpful about this chart, and you should kind of keep it, off to the side or second screen or whatever, is they told me what to name things, right? They told me the data type and the other settings. We just have to convert this now into what we call SQL, language or whatever. All right, so student ID is an integer. All right, so back over to MySQL Workbench. And so we're going to do it like this: student ID. Right. And because I'm going to have many columns and I want it to look kind of organized, I'm going to use my tab key to move over to make some neat columns. I'm going to make this an integer. The other thing I noticed is that this should be not null. It cannot, in other words, it cannot be empty, right? Tab again. And then I'm also going to call it a primary key. Now, I'm going to say a couple things about primary keys, right? If you start reading up on these, there's a few different ways to declare them, right? One is as you create the column, you just add it like I did. And frankly, I think this is the best way, personally. Right? Another way that you can do it is you can add the primary key declaration at the bottom. So you list all your columns and data types, and then at the bottom you say, oh, and the primary key is whatever. And both approaches are valid. I will use this way because I think this is clearer, and I think, and speculatively, that most database people tend to do it this way. All right, let's create the next field. The next one is student last name. And then I want you to see what I'm doing here. That one's going to be characters, right? And I'm going to use varchar because that's just kind of the general thing that we do. Open and close parens. And then I'm going to make a guess on this. Well, I'm not making a guess on this. We were told it should be set to 25. I think that's a pretty good amount. So it can hold up to 25 characters, and it is not allowed to be empty. And then a comma. Now, what I'm trying to do here, and this might seem silly, is I'm trying to align all my data types, all my column names, all my not nulls are aligned. And if I had multiple keys, they would all be in line. So I'm like using tab stops in the coding engine to make things kind of look like columns. Do you have to do it that way? No, right? I could, just have it like this. As long as there's spaces in between, it'll work. But I think when you're doing a lot of columns, it's easier to read when you do it like this. Let's just keep moving forward. So we'll have student first name. Also, you see my columns are breaking again, so I'm going to tab those over too. And we'll do a varchar, and we were told on this one to make it 20, and that first name also cannot be null. Then we go to student address. That's a varchar. We were told to set it at 30. That one can be blank. I guess you can be homeless or whatever. Living in the sky. The student city. Once again, a varchar. This one will be 15. Then we'll move to student state. And interestingly, I think we were told here to make that a character with 2 spaces. So I'm just going to do that just to try a different data type, right? And to me, this one makes sense. This is like an old school approach. Well, the state, we use a 2-letter abbreviation, so why make it a big data type? It makes no sense. And I don't know if you guys picked up on this, but there were more columns down here that we never reached, right? When we were looking at it before. So after state is zip, phone, and date of birth. All right. And I do just so happen to have those all pre-created. So I'm just pasting them in. I hope you guys don't hate me for doing that, but save a little bit of time. And I do want you to notice that the date of birth is in the date format. So year, month, day. And that can't be null. This is the last entry. This one does not need a comma here. If I do put a comma here, I want you to notice that the coding engine is starting to underline in red here, saying, if you're putting a comma there, there better be more information. All right, so here are all the columns. I will also say some coders, right, we'll also take all of this and tab it over like this. So whatever you think looks good to you, works well for your eyes. This could all be on one line of text if you wanted. But you can see when you organize it like this, put each thing on its own line, it's almost like looking at that table. It's kind of like the same columns, basically, right? Much easier to read. All right. The other little tidbit I wanted to add, right? Like if you wanted to declare the primary key, you could list it down here and there's syntax for it, but I'm not going to do that. That was something our old textbook enforced and I was never a fan of, by the way. All right. Cursor's inside the current query. I'm going to go ahead and run this. So running it selectively, it says create table. Looks like it succeeded. So now when I come over here, I'm not seeing that there's a drop down by tables yet. So I'm hitting refresh. Now I can see the expander arrow. So I'm going to expand it. There's student. I can click on it and notice all the column names and the data types right next to them. So we have created that now. There is no information in there currently, right? So this is the information. And then if you want to show me, for example, that the creation of the table succeeded, I mean, I guess you can show me the output window, but seeing it in the schema table is kind of a nice screenshot too. It's like, look, here it is, you know, see, it worked. If anybody is running this right now and is running into problems, let me know. Because this was number one, right? Or this is number two. All right, I'm not even going to bother, I guess, numbering at this time, if you guys don't mind. Let's move on to the next one. This will come back on screen in just a moment. All right. Remember, when you create the commands, I want you to paste them in here. So, for example, it actually works pretty well, right? So if you copy that, come back over to Word and paste it in. That's what I'm looking for. I know the tab stops are all broken. So if you're really that particular, you can come in here and fix them, right? And I'm certainly not grading on that. Yeah, it doesn't even like me to do it. Anyhow, but that's kind of the general idea here. Okay, next one. Create a new table named department. Same thing. Now notice with department, only two columns, right? Department ID, which is a number, and a department name, which is characters. That's all. Okay. That should be really easy compared to what we just did. All right. So let's create table department. Open close parens and a semicolon. Go in between the parens, press enter a couple of times, and make some space. Okay. I'll start off indented since I think it kind of looks nice. And then I'll just say department ID. I'm going to follow the columns above, by the way. We'll make that an integer because we were told to. It will be not null. And it will be a primary key. Then we will have a department name. That's going to be a varchar of size 30. That also cannot be null. There must be an entry. That's the whole thing. We're currently on this query. I'm hitting the run button. All right. Succeeded. We are going to refresh again. And now I see both tables. I can click on the table. I see the columns. Right. Grab your code, drop it into the document. Next one is to create a new table named instructor. So this has 5 fields. I'll let you study that, but I have the info over here, so I'm just going to go back and start coding it. So create table instructor, open close parens, semicolon, cursor between, add a couple lines, indent, and then start listing your column names. Instructor ID, int, not null, does an ID always have to be numeric? It's kind of an interesting question. No. Why? Why does it have to be numeric? Like if your driver's license number, is that fully numeric? No. We had a field for, yeah, I'm noticing I misspelled this now. See that? I'm glad I caught it. Instructor last name, varchar 40. Why? I'm not sure. Must have a lot of instructors with hyphens. Or I know why. PhD, uh, MS, right? Like all their degree things, probably. Yeah. Something like that. Okay, that's got to be not null. We got instructor, first name, not a big int. Notice how it did auto suggest there too. And I'm tabbing, and I don't want to be doing that. I want a varchar. This is going to be 20. Also not null. Then we'll have instructor phone. Varchar 12, Y12. 10 digits and a phone number. How long are country codes? Oh, 12 characters. Okay. 10 characters, two parentheses, and a dash, right? Or 10 numbers and two dashes. I'm not sure I like the number 12 there. I'll be really honest. Because, like, what if somebody's international? Well, they wouldn't be international at work at a school. Well, okay, we'll just leave it at 12. I'm like trying to troubleshoot this. I probably shouldn't bother. All right. You guys should all know though that like here in the US we use 10-digit phone numbers, but there's really a 3-digit country code in front of that too. So all of our 10-digit numbers are really 13 digits. The prefix country code for the US, because we invented all this stuff, is 001, by the way. Useless information you don't even need to know. All right. Oops, I'm pasting this one in because I'm getting to the lazy point here. And then what I also wanted to do, and this one's kind of interesting, and I want to go back to the instructions here and just look at this one really carefully. Because we developed the primary key here, right? It makes sense for an ID field, and every table should have one. But this one here also connects our instructors to the department they teach in, right? So here's the thinking, and without getting once again into a conversation about foreign keys, but we're going to put together a foreign key here to show that this department ID has to match an existing department ID over in the department table in order for this instructor to be able to teach for them. And notice how we say references department, and this is the syntax here is the table and the column name. So in other words, we have a primary key to make this value unique. This reference is really what we call a foreign key, meaning we're connecting to a primary key in a different table. Right. So we call that a foreign key, and we use the word references in our code. So I'm going to show you the code for this. And we didn't really lecture on it, so I apologize for that. But I guess you're getting the lecture now. So, and the approach for doing the primary key is comparable. So we'll start by just simply saying foreign key. Which field is going to connect the foreign key? And that's going to be the field right above us. I'm just going to double click copy it rather than type that, mistype it. And then we'll say that references or connects to the department table, department ID. So that forms a connection then between this field here in this table and this one, which is it's a primary key here, but to this table, it's a foreign key. It's not a primary key here, but it is a primary key in the other table. That's what that's telling us, right? This is something that we will work more upon, foreign keys and stuff, primary keys, as we move forward, right? The query is put together. My cursor's inside, so I'm going to hit the run button. Looks like it succeeded. Let's hit the refresh. And there you see the department table. And let's just click on it. Let's click on instructor. Right. Notice how in these other tables, the only column that's bold is the primary key. When we get to the instructor table, that's the primary key. And then this is a foreign key. It has no indicator here, though. But the fact that it's bolded like that shows you that it's a foreign key. So it's kind of already got a connection to this other table, right? So we don't sort of have to join them. The connection is implied via the creation, right? So when we enter in instructor information, if that department doesn't exist, we can't enter that department in, is really what that will do for us. All right, let's move on to the next one. Try to be mindful of the time here. And we are certainly not going to finish all these, but we are going to start the first insert command at the very least. So now we have tables, right? We created a database. We created 3 tables, created the columns, the data types, all the settings for them. And now we need to get some data in there. And it says here, it shows you what information you should enter, right? So notice there's a department ID provided and the name of the department. All right, so let's do that command first. And this is a pretty simple one to start with. And by the way, you can do these, right? And so maybe I should go back there for just a second here. Because having this information handy is, so what I would do is I would put this on your second screen or split your screen or whatever so you can see what you need to type in. You could type these in one value at a time. Okay, so I'm gonna demonstrate that approach. All right, so I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna do insert into the department table. Which columns am I going into? So here's a set of parentheses. I'm going to insert into, and I know this from looking here, department ID and department name. So I'm just going to write those down. Department ID and department name. Okay. That's where I'm dropping the information into. And I'm seeing a red underline here. So I'm wondering, did I misspell? All right, maybe it's just because my statement's incomplete. I'm not going to freak out to it. And then on the next line, I'm going to type in values. I'm only going to send in one set of information here, parentheses and a semicolon, right? So I'll just put in the first entry. So I'll do 1, comma, and then that first entry was business information tech. Business information tech. Why is it not longer? Because I have a character limit of 30. So I don't know if that's 30 characters, but it's probably getting pretty close. So I can't get the whole word technology. So mind you, I'm inserting one row here. So I'm going to run this really quick just to see if that works. It looks like it worked. And now if I go to which table, into the department table, and I run this little table, see the whole table command, right? You'll notice that that information is indeed in there. All right. Now, is it possible to put a bunch of information in at once? Yeah, and that's really the better way to do it, especially if you know the information in advance. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to add all the rest of the values. And I want you to watch how I do this here, right? So I still follow the same format, but instead of terminating with a semicolon, I put a comma in between and add all the other values. Right. I could have done this all in one fell swoop, but a lot of times when especially if you're writing an application or you're dealing with a front end or something like that, sometimes you're only adding one record at a time. Sometimes you have a bunch of data and you want to push it all in at once. That's what this approach is for. All right, I'm going to go ahead and execute. There it is. Let's come back here and rerun this query, and you will see that all those entries made it into the table. And I do like doing this part of it. Don't have to look. You can just trust that it went in there. But yeah, you're throwing stuff into the database. Did it work? Sure. Yeah. Okay, I see it. Why not? All right. So that would be that one. Now, as you move on to the next few exercises. So right now we're on exercise 5. We still have to do 6 and 7. And basically what the commands are is to get the rest of that data into those tables. And as you can imagine, this is a lot more data on these. There's more columns. And you want to get it all correct as well, right? And so you have to concoct these commands. So I'm leaving these until next week. Let you guys work on these. These should be a piece of cake. Follow the same format. The format is your insert into command is you just declare which table, which they tell you, insert into department, inside parentheses, the column names, followed by values inside parentheses, and then comma separated all the data that's going in. What you want to be mindful of is a couple of things, that if the data going in is an integer, there's no quotes around it. If it's text, either single or double quotes. If you don't follow that, MySQL will yell at you, basically, and give you error messages. So I want you to work with this a little bit, insert a bunch of data in there. You can insert more data if you wish. And then if I'm not mistaken, I don't think there's a delete command. Oh yeah, the delete command comes later. But we have a bunch more commands to operate here. So I'll leave that for next week. So we're going to cover that next week when we come back. That's where we're going to start our class. And so this video will end here, and there will be a part 2 next week.